Welcome. Welcome to A Taste of Justice. I'm Professor Angela Mae Kupenda. This series is designed for my students who I'm teaching remotely to give them a little something extra to encourage them to take a soak in the law and not just a quick shower. This series is for all of us. The preamble of the Constitution says, we, the people of the United States, in order to establish justice. So learning about the Constitution is key. It's key to enlightenment, and it is key to the pursuit of justice. In my video series, I hope to bring at least a taste of that justice. This series, this semester, I am teaching First Amendment law at Mississippi College School of Law. And I tell you the name of my school only for informational purposes. All views expressed here, all interpretations, nuances are my own and are not to be ascribed to my school or to my students. So for the First Amendment, it's such an important amendment in the Constitution. It is very relevant, and it is very relevant today, and it is very relevant for our discourse in our society. In my first clip that I posted just a few minutes ago, I explained 3 of the basic rules of First Amendment law. And so this clip, I'm going to briefly review those rules, and then I'm going to expand more on the 3rd rule that I offered, okay? I'm hoping that this clip helps my students as they are going to read all of those pages that are assigned for them to read next week, where we will look at the actual cases that discuss many of these principles. Then a week from now, I'll come back and summarize what those cases did hold, those cases primarily by the United States Supreme Court. Okay, so let's get started. Let me review the 3 rules that we discussed in the earlier clip. The first rule is this: First Amendment rights are not absolute. Sometimes we get it a bit twisted. We believe that the First Amendment protects whatever we say, wherever we say, to whoever we say it, in what manner we say it. But like other individual rights in the Constitution, the United States Supreme Court has held that the First Amendment does not provide absolute rights. It is subjected to some limitations, some regulations by government. Okay, the second rule. The second rule is this: pure conduct is not protected under the First Amendment. Pure speech is protected under the First Amendment. So pure conduct is not protected. Pure speech is. And we talked about this a little bit in the earlier clip, and we will be revisiting that point during this semester. Now for the 3rd rule. The 3rd rule is a real doozy. The 3rd rule, but it's a very important rule for you to learn as you analyze the First Amendment. The 3rd rule: generally, pure speech is protected from content regulation by the government. Generally, we know that pure conduct is not protected under the First Amendment, but generally, pure speech is protected under the First Amendment. Now notice, I did say generally. And in the law, we use that word a lot. And there's another word we use a lot: unless. So generally, pure speech is protected under the First Amendment unless, and there are a number of unlesses that goes with that rule. The first is pure speech is protected unless the government meets that high level of scrutiny. And again, in the notes below this clip, I refer you back to an earlier video that will explain these levels of scrutiny more if you were not with us in the last semester on this series, or if you want a little review. So pure speech is protected under the First Amendment unless the government meets that high level of scrutiny. Pure speech is protected unless government can show that its regulation has a compelling governmental interest and the restriction on the speech is narrowly tailored to that interest. If that's the case, then government can regulate even the content of your speech. Okay, there's another unless. Let's go to the general. Pure speech is protected from content regulation of the government unless government is able to show that they're not really regulating the content of your message. Instead, it is a content neutral, reasonable time, place, and manner regulation. Government may say, we really weren't worried about what you were saying. We were not favoring one content over the other. What we were doing was imposing a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. And I talked about that some in the earlier clip, and we will discuss it more as the semester goes on. Now let's go for the next unless. Pure speech is protected from content regulation of the government unless the speech is in an unprotected category. If the speech is in an unprotected category, government can regulate it at a very low level. Government can regulate it by satisfying only a rational basis reasonableness test if the speech is in an unprotected category. Now you're saying, wait a minute now, the First Amendment does not use those words, the text of it. But remember, the Constitution is interpreted by the courts, especially by the federal courts and the US Supreme Court. And the US Supreme Court has said that there is some speech that shouldn't get this kind of protection. The court says there's some speech where government can regulate it more because it is in an unprotected category. It is speech, according to the court, that has very low value, and it could cause such great harm. So therefore, government is allowed to regulate it with a low level of scrutiny called rational basis. So now you're asking, oh yeah, I know you're asking this next question. I know you are. You're saying, well, what are these unprotected categories? Where did they come from? Look, we're going to spend the first few weeks of this semester examining these unprotected categories. And we're going to examine some attempts to add other speech to the unprotected category list. And many of those attempts have been quite unsuccessful. So what are some of these unprotected categories that lowers the scrutiny that we give government when they go messing with the content? What are these unprotected categories? Well, there are some that have been recognized over time. One category that government can regulate more is speech that advocates illegal action. We saw this category in place a lot when, many of you are much younger than I am, but during my lifetime, there was a military draft where men would be required to go and fight in various wars, whether they wanted to or volunteered. It was a mandatory draft. So during those times, a lot of these cases dealt with individuals speaking out against a mandatory military draft. And well, we'll talk about those cases later. But the court said that speech that advocates illegal action, and the illegal action was perhaps encouraging individuals not to enlist in the draft, not to show up as required. But I'm going too far. We will talk about those cases next week. Now, what is another unprotected category? Another unprotected category is speech that is defamation, or speech that gives unlawful public disclosure of private information. Now, defamation, the court says low value speech, gossip maybe, low value speech that is untrue, low value speech that harms another person's reputation. As a child, we say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words will never hurt me. But not so, especially in the day of social media. So defamation, government may regulate it more. It is regarded as being an unprotected category, but the rule gets more complicated than that. We'll talk about those cases later. Another category of unprotected speech that receives, government may regulate it more, a lower level of protection, is pure speech, but the government may regulate it more because the court has placed it in an unprotected category, is obscenity. Now, this also gets complicated because, let's see how to put it, everything that is pornographic is not necessarily legally obscene. The court has articulated a test, and if the speech is determined to be legally obscene, government may regulate it with a lower level of scrutiny. The fourth category is called fighting words. Now, fighting words, the court has said that these are words that would cause an ordinary man to fight. And I always ask my students, the test says an ordinary man, so people only have to be ordinary. So why do they say ordinary men and not ordinary women? Do men fight more quickly? We have those interesting conversations in those cases in class. But fighting words are more in your face kind of words that could cause an ordinary person to want to fight back. And the courts has said that speech is in an unprotected category. You're like, wow, you didn't know about all of this. You thought that your First Amendment rights were absolute. Perhaps no. The court says that pure speech is protected from content regulation unless government can persuade that it's not about the content, it's about a time, place, and manner regulation, unless government can meet this high level of review, or unless the speech is in an unprotected category. Now, the first unprotected category that we're going to cover in my class next week And actually, my students are reading the cases, I hope, now, so they will be ready for the discussion on Monday, relates to speech that advocates illegal action. And we're going to look at how do we know if a given speaker's expression falls in that unprotected category, or perhaps should fall in that unprotected category. So let me give you some examples. Let me give you some fact patterns to think about, and then I'll come back in a week and tell you how the court, actually ruled. Let's say that the country is at war. But before we do this, let's go back. What we're going to do, we're going to look at some cases that are called historical cases. Then we're going to look at the test that has been called the modern day test that we use today. Then we will close that area by, at least for a while, by looking at a post 9/11 case and to see, have we now once again become more restrictive of speech that advocates illegal action? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me give you a few hypotheticals to think about. Okay, let's say we're during the time of a mandatory military draft. And that means if your number comes up, whether you agree with the military, whether you agree with war, whatever you agree with a specific war, you have to go, you have been drafted into the military. So let's say there is a speaker who is opposed, disagrees with the military draft to a specific war. And the speaker goes to, he goes out and talks with individuals who have followed the law to sign up for the draft or what have you. And he passes out pamphlets telling them why they should not go when called to the military. And the speaker is arrested. Is this pamphlet protected speech, or should it be unprotected? Was the speaker advocating illegal action and encouraging individuals not to submit to the draft? Think on that one. Discuss it with your family and friends. Let me give you another one. Let's say there is a speaker who is a very popular figure, and this speaker has a huge following. So the speaker goes to a convention with people who are like-minded. It's a convention with individuals who pretty much agree with what the speaker is saying. And the speaker is arrested for advocating illegal action in that speech, even though he's saying things that others there agree with. So, should that be unprotected speech? Does it matter that the speaker is a national figure? People who are national speakers, are national figures, or are popular speakers, should they have more speech protection or less? That's an interesting one. We will talk about that case also in about a week. Let me give you another one. What if a person mails a cartoon in opposition to the war? The person is opposed to the war. They mail a cartoon and a poem, and they are arrested. They say, this is my speech right to write this poem and make this cartoon. Is that protected speech, or is that speech in an unprotected category if the cartoon is advocating for individuals to not enlist in the military? Okay, let me give you one more. Two more speakers. They're not opposed to a specific enlistment, a specific draft. They're opposed to some of the foreign policies of the country. And they want to make sure that their message really gets out there. So they print up just, I don't know, thousands of pamphlets. And they're like, how can we get the pamphlets out sooner? Two men. What they do is they're in New York. They go in a building on a higher up floor, and they just throw the pamphlets out the window, hoping that people will catch them or pick them up off the ground and read them, and they're arrested. Should their speech be protected if they're advocating against foreign policy or a specific foreign policy? Is that speech that is advocating illegal action? Should they stay in jail or should they get out of jail? Becomes the question. Aren't these cases amazing? Let me give you one more. Let's say you're opposed to some policy practice of the government, and you hear that there is a group that is going to push for change. You're thinking that this group will push for change in a nonviolent way through the legal process. So you go to the meeting thinking you're going to participate in a movement for change. But when you get there, you see that the group is going to use violence. And things are just getting out of hand in their plans to use violence to bring about their change. So you try to stop them. You say, no, 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 we shouldn't do it that way. We should use a nonviolent approach to bring about change. But they won't hear you. They go ahead with their plans. The police arrest you. And you say, yes, I joined the group, but I joined the group for us to be nonviolent. I didn't know they were going to be a violent group. And you're arrested and you go to jail. Should your conviction be upheld? Is that pure speech that should be fully be protected from governmental regulation? Or was your speech advocating illegal action because of the group that you were with, and speech that that government should be able to regulate at a very low level? Wow, these cases are something else. All of these examples are from the historical cases. And we're going to talk about how the court ruled in these cases in my class next week. And I'll come back at the end of next week and summarize the holdings for you. In the meanwhile, think about these hypotheticals. I've explained some of them in the text below this video. Discuss with your family and friends and community. You know, the preamble of the Constitution says we the people of the United States in order to establish justice. And I believe, like Frederick Douglass, the learning is a key to enlightenment. And enlightenment takes us forward toward justice. And my goal here in sharing with you about these concepts of First Amendment in my whole series is to bring you at least a taste of that justice. So subscribe, sign up for notifications, You don't want to miss a thing. See you next week. Thank you.